Yeah, speaking about karma, by the way, coming back to those termites that ate the Abhidhamma books, it's quite possible that they could turn out to be, get reborn as human beings, and then they'll just come right out and memorize the Abhidhamma text very easily.
You don't want to ask a question? Okay.
Well, I'm assuming that they had intention. Okay, let us take some questions.
Hi, I'm trying to relate this to practice day to day, and one of the things that seemed really relevant was this distinction you had written up there between Paramatha and Sammuti.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, it seems like that could be a good catalyst for just day-to-day experience to deconstruct things we think are real.
Exactly, yeah.
And to tease them apart until you can't tease them apart anymore, and then those things seem fairly neutral. Is that how... I wonder if you could talk about, is that a way to use this, or how do you make use of all of these categories in practical life?
Okay, this is a good, in fact, you brought up a good point, how to use this distinction, paramatta and sammuti. And as I said, I don't really like the word paramatta in the sense of ultimate or something which is irreducible, something that cannot be further analyzed. But let's take the contrast between conventional concepts and actualities that are concrete actualities. Okay, so we get angry with a person, or we have persistent resentment towards a person. And so what is happening is that we're grasping upon a concept of a person and building up a mental image of a person as being a concrete actuality, something existing in its own right. But now, if we want to dissolve that kind of resentment, that tendency to anger, one of the methods we can use is to investigate that person in terms of the constituents of being, the constituents of personal existence. So what are you angry with? Are you angry with that person's rupa, his bodily form? How could one be angry with physical form? Physical form is just, constellation of material particles. And if we use modern science, we could say, okay, what is that physical form? It's a bunch of cells put together. The cells are made out of molecules. The molecules are made up of atoms. The atoms are made of subatomic particles. Subatomic particles are made out of quarks. So is that what the latest one is? I'm not following the latest science news. So a person, the body, it's just like a bunch of quarks. Can you be angry with quarks? Or angry with atoms or molecules? So it's senseless to be angry with the rupa. Or if you use like the Buddhist analysis, are you angry with the earth element, the water element, the fire element, the air element, the types of secondary matter? No point being angry with the rupa. Then how about feelings? Feelings are always arising and passing away. So you can't be angry with his pleasant feelings, no point being angry with his painful feelings, no point being angry with his neutral feelings. Perceptions, no reason to be angry with perceptions. Volitions, sometimes you don't like what the person does, and that's an expression of their volitions. So maybe the volitions are a little problematic area, but then you think, okay, those volitions are impermanent, they arise and pass away. Maybe there will arise in him sometimes volitions of doing nasty things to other people, but those volitions are creating karma. That karma will produce its unpleasant fruit for him. So he's going to suffer from his own volitions. No reason for me to add to his suffering by being angry with him. And then his consciousness that's always arising and passing away, and it's just bare awareness of what's going on. So it can't be angry with the consciousness. So in this way, through investigating a person in terms of bare dharmas, bare phenomena, one can dissolve that feeling of anger and resentment. That's one method that can be used. And also, let's take sometimes the example might be conceit or pride. You might be proud. You have certain skills that other people don't have, so you think, okay, I'm better than those people, or I'm the best, number one. Then you investigate, what is it really that's number one here? You're thinking, I'm number one. What is this I? So you look into the I. Am I bodily form? Am I really feelings? Am I really perception? Am I those volitional activities which are arising and passing away? Am I that consciousness? They're all permanent. They're all sort of bound up with dukkha. They're all non-self. And so in this way one drops the kind of pride or conceit.
Thank you.
Okay, please.
Yes. As you've been describing much of the day-to-day to I'm a rudimentary beginner with the Abhidhamma, but as I have heard you today describe experience as a process of bare phenomena.
Right.
And yet I also heard you just now in your explication and before in the question and answer say you were somewhat uncomfortable with the atomistic
there's an atomistic
experience.
tendency.
And yet I thought that was the heart of what you were drawing us toward. Can you reconcile that?
The heart of what I was...
drawing us toward. So if the process of experience is nothing but bare phenomena, which to me does feel atomistic.
Yeah.
And yet you say you're uncomfortable with the atom. I think you said that reducing it to the atomistic makes you somewhat uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I wanted to know if you would reconcile that discomfort. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah. Okay, what I would say is that there is that tendency towards atomism and reductionism in the Abhidhamma, but what's important to bear in mind in that even though there's this tendency to break things down into constituents, components, factors, when you take in the other side of there's an analytical side to the Abhidhamma, and then there's the synthetic or relational side. And so what takes place in the relational side of the Abhidhamma, particularly in that book called the Patthana, which lays down the conditional relations between all of the factors of experience, then you see that the reductionist and atomistic tendency can result from, I would say, a one-sided approach to the Abhidhamma. But it has to be balanced to avoid that reductionism. One has to balance it by taking account of the synthetic or relational side of the Abhidhamma, which brings in conditionality to show how all of the factors bind together into wholes.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Yeah, there's a very good essay by actually my teacher, his name, the German monk Nyanaponika Thera. He has a book called Abhidhamma Studies. It used to be called Researches in Buddhist Psychology, then Wisdom Publications retitled it. I don't remember their subtitle, but the main title is Abhidhamma Studies. Then the second essay in that book is called The Two Aspects of the Abhidhamma Method. And he is specifically addressing there the tendency towards reductionism that one finds in a lot of Abhidhamma analysis or Abhidhamma explanation, and says that the side of analysis has to be countered and balanced by bringing in the side of relational relativity, relatedness, conditionality. Then one gets a balanced picture.
In terms of what you've presented today, we Which part is the relational part, the relatedness and
the relational part is what one finds emphasized in the 7th book called the Bhikkhu, where 24 conditions are laid down. I gave some examples of it in, well, don't have to go back there, but how, say, the 4 elements are related to one another by this relationship of mutuality, how the 4 elements are related to the secondary types of form by co-arising, how different consciousness and the mental factors are related through, again, mutuality and co-arising. So there's this very complex interwoven web of conditionality which binds all of the factors together.
Is that the Martikas as well?
The Matika is pretty much analytical, as you see it in the Dhammasangani. But then what the Patana does is to take all of the terms in the Matika and then to explicate what are the conditional relations that hold these terms together, or these factors together. What are the conditional relations between the wholesome and the wholesome and the unwholesome, wholesome and indeterminate, and then each gets subdivided into so many different subordinate aspects.
This is really great, thank you. So my first part A of the question is there were 2 words I missed and I'd like to write them down.
Yeah.
And so I know you even specifically suggested that we not write this part down, but it interested me when you were talking about the fixed law of sequence and the various laws.
Yeah.
And you spoke of 5-door inverting chitta.
Adverting, not inverting, adverting, turning, meaning turning to.
Oh, adverting, okay.
A-D-V-E-R-T, to advert to, it turns to.
Okay, and then there was, thank you, there was receiving consciousness, investigating consciousness, determining consciousness, and then there were 7 moments of something and 2 moments of something, and then I'll say why I'm asking.
I didn't give the technical term for those 7 moments, but they are called javana.
Javana.
I'll write it down.
Okay.
The word javana, it comes from the verb javati, which means to run, and maybe that word is used because these 7 kinds of 7 chittas, these 7 mind moments, run one after another after another. The word javana, it's impossible to translate. So I think in the comprehensive manual of Abhidhamma, I think I didn't translate it because any English word doesn't really match the original. But it's the states of consciousness that create karma. It's the states of consciousness in which one responds to the sensory input. And it's in those states of consciousness that one creates the karma. And then that's followed, when there's a very distinct object, it's followed by 2 moments of what are called registration consciousness, where one registers the impression of the object that's impacted on the mind.
Ooh, thank you so much.
Yeah, if the object is not so distinct, then one doesn't register the impression.
Okay, it kind of doesn't go all the way. So the reason this feels interesting to me is we're learning these different frameworks, and all that I really know is what seems to happen in the practice of sitting.
Yeah.
And so where I've been watching is I can look at things from the perspective of the 5 aggregates, and that seems to fit this experience. Yeah. And then I can look at things from the perspective of the dependent origination, and that seems to fit. But then I'm curious about where and how those fit together, and about the asavas, because I noticed that when there's a moment out of stillness where the chitta starts to have little waves, I can either go with it or sort of roll it back into stillness again. And so I'm learning about these words and how they all connect.
Yeah. For investigation, I find like the scheme of the 5 aggregates is quite satisfactory, which is probably why the Buddha used it as the primary scheme for investigation in the suttas. Things like this series of states of consciousness, it always used to be said that they go by so fast that no normal person can discover them. This is supposed to be like the unique discovery of the Buddha. But now the Burmese meditation teacher Paok Soyador says that using his method, one could actually distinguish these individual chittas going by so very quickly. And people who have practiced that method say, yes, we can do that. But I say maybe not. I don't know.
That's really neat. Thank you for giving us some really fun things to explore.
So, having been served a fruit salad from my karma.
Having been served a fruit salad of?
Yes, of my ripened karma.
Yeah.
It's an interesting experience to try and untangle that skein of thread. And so I'm wondering, like where do we go with it? Maybe I know how to answer the question myself, but I'm curious because we're talking about this and we're getting really clear, and I'm thinking to myself, well, we have unwholesome thoughts all the time that arise and fall and rise and fall. And we work with them, and they change, and our minds are plastic, and blah, blah, blah. But, periodically things ripen, and all of a sudden there we are.
Yeah.
And so what do you think? Then what?
Okay, well, naturally things are going to, say, ripen from our previous karma, bringing sometimes good results, which then can become objects of attachment. So if things are going too smoothly one's way, there's a lot of comfort, convenience, success, that can lead to pride and attachment. So then one has to use, the instruments of the Dhamma to see the danger in becoming complacent about comfort, convenience, luxury, pleasure, being surrounded with agreeable things, and break or at least reduce the attachment to those things, which doesn't mean one has to abandon them, but one can use them without being attached to them. Then when unwholesome karma ripens in the form of different experiences of suffering, pain, misery, rejection, failure, struggle, then one can reflect on this in terms of one's karma. Like this is perhaps the unfolding of my past karma, my previous unwholesome deeds. So I shouldn't be upset by this. I shouldn't be blame myself. I shouldn't think that I'm a failure. But see this as the way I try to treat disagreeable experiences, as challenges to develop wholesome qualities so that one could face these situations with equanimity, or else use them as means for strengthening wholesome qualities within the mind. Particularly, you must know we have the scheme of the 10 spiritual perfections, or paramis. Those are extremely important to develop. So when we meet with difficulties, then we see this as an obstacle to develop particularly patience and equanimity. When we meet with difficult people, see that as an opportunity to develop patience and loving kindness. Or if the loving kindness doesn't work, then develop equanimity towards that person. So when there's unpleasant experiences that tend to suck one into them with attachment, then one develops the attitude of renunciation or turning away from them or investigating with wisdom. And when there are disagreeable experiences or disagreeable people, relate to them with patience, equanimity, loving kindness, and always maintain determination to follow the path of the wholesome rather than the unwholesome. So I think, the Buddha's teaching taken as a whole, even without all of this details, just taking the general contours, gives us very, very clear practical instructions on how to deal with both the agreeable and attractive and the painful, unsatisfactory side of experience, and how to emerge from both sides stronger and triumphant. Okay, please feel welcome to speak. We have a question coming here.
Thank you for these teachings.
Oh, thank you.
I'm just wondering how the defilement of ignorance plays in this, in terms of what you don't know or don't see, or what doesn't arise.
Yeah.
And I guess it's related relationally because of the impact of that when we're kind of bumping around and not aware of the harm we might be creating. So I'm wondering about that at a broader level.
At a broader level? You mean at the level of like daily experience, ordinary daily experience?
Yes. I guess I'm not real clear what I'm what I mean by that, but I am wondering how the element of ignorance gets included into investigation or waking up, or and the impact that might have globally or collectively in the sense of we're all one and kumbaya kind of kind of thing. So.
There's a very short sutta in the Connected Discourses, the Samyutta Nikaya, where the Buddha says, the element of ignorance is a very powerful element. And it really has so many levels at which it operates. There are the very subtle levels which were intended to overcome, through investigating, through insight, the nature of things like the five aggregates, sense bases, dependent origination. But also we find ignorance operating massively, you spoke about the situation in the world today, massively at the level of ordinary transactions between people and with the world. For example, this is like a sterling example of ignorance with a crown on its head. It's like a pig with a crown on its head. All of the climate scientists are telling us the planet is heating up, climate is changing, if we don't change course, droughts, storms, superstorms, violent hurricanes, droughts, heat waves, flooding of the coasts, changing topography of the land, famine, unstable states, great economic losses. But these CEOs at the head of the fossil fuel industry, the coal industry, gas industry, are getting together with their public relations company. How are we going to deal with this, Bob? The scientists just released this report the other day. It's in all of the newspapers that the Arctic ice is melting, and they're predicting these changes for the planet. We made a good profit margin last quarter. If people get wind of this, they're going to start putting more and more pressure. turning to green energy. We don't want them to do that. So you're a public relations firm. Give us some strategies so that we could confuse the people a little bit more. Okay, so that I would say is like a prime example of ignorance. Like those guys live on the same planet we do. What is life going to be like for them? Especially if he has a townhouse out on Long Island. Long Island, it's east of New York City. It's going to get hit by these superstorms coming in. So he could lose his precious townhouse. But still, he's concerned, how do we deceive the people, mislead them so that they don't put any pressure on our company so that we're not going to be, our profit margin won't be dropping? Yeah, so this is a kind of ignorance in everyday life.
Yeah, and I find it's hard to look at that and say, well, how do I get mad at, the form? And how, how am I mad with this collection? It seems to me that the notion of concept is useful. The sammuti is useful in working to awaken some of that ignorance. So you almost can take a ball of something that is a concept or a notion or a belief to begin to investigate the deeper meanings that connect us all and raise awareness and what have you. But I really like the point 3 under the Dharma theory of the 3 conceptual schemes being a useful way to not just a useful way to investigate some of the relational complexities that we have. And I was wondering if that's too much of a stretch or if I'm trying to simplify things too much. But I could see those 3 points being so useful in the face of conflict and difficulties and this kind of
One has to distinguish the different levels and not in any way dismiss what we call the sammuti or conventional level as unimportant and just focus on what's called the paramatta or ultimate level. Like when dealing with things like global warming, which is being intensified because of the behavior of the heads of the fossil fuel industries, if you think, okay, they're just a bundle of the 5 aggregates, just cheetahs arising, accompanied by feeling, perception, mental activities, consciousness, and the physical form, related, co-arising, of mutuality, so and so on, then nothing will get done. To deal with ignorance at that level, one has to employ the conventional truth and maybe in letters to the editor or essays, try to find ways to refute the misinformation, disinformation coming out from the companies. Or maybe if there's a march on Washington, join a march on Washington to call attention to the problem of global warming. Or link up with some of the organizations that are attempting to combat global warming. So within daily life, we have to deal with the grosser types of ignorance, and that will often involve thinking and acting in terms of the conventional truth.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we have a question here.
Thank you. Piggybacking on global warming and segueing to ordination of women, which seems like a similar issue that's tied into cultural ignorance and historical ignorance. And wondering, even today, as you were asked to translate the text, how the text informs the dialogue that's happening within Theravada Buddhism around the ordination of women?
Yeah. That's the question?
Yeah, I'm curious how scripture or how these texts are used to support or refute
different positions.
The positions.
Yeah.
And if there's flexibility around Scripture or how Scripture is understood.
Yeah. This gets into rather subtle points in the interpretation of what's called the Vinaya, the monastic discipline, in which there are certain rules that concern the ordination of women, which have been interpreted in certain ways. This takes us pretty far from the Abhidhamma. Do you want me to answer that question? Maybe save that question. The evening is supposed to be like an open question and answer.
So it seems to me that, I'm a newbie to Abhidhamma. I have to say it first. I've studied Suttas and Vinaya and practiced meditation. That's been informed by Abhidhamma, but today is my first introduction to it like this, and I think I'm seeing that the taking apart of the phenomena is really useful for unbinding, and so looking at that CEO, taking him apart like this, that may help to unbind the anger, and also simultaneously. With the release of anger, seeing that there are just different conditions that have come together, the wisdom and the insight that arises out of that is not only passive, but can also be proactive. That is, seeing that these are causes and conditions, and that they're in flux, and that we have choice, and intentional actions impact what is happening. They are a very important part of what's happening. Then we see, like if there were a bunch of ingredients that have been taken out of the shopping bag and laid out on the counter, then you can see what you can make out of them and make a choice about that. And it seems like we can then make choices. It's like all the pieces are laid out and we see, we can pick up this and put it with that. That is, we change the conditions with our knowledge of causality and relationality. Because every moment, changes the law of nature. Mm-hmm. So it's not only a passive unbinding that releases negative emotion, but opens the doorway for proactivity, wise proactivity, because we see conditions and we understand whatever we do with those conditions will have effect, does have effect. And that's where wise action arises. From my point of view, just getting what I've been considering about what you've been saying today, and to my mind that applies equally to global warming, to women's ordination, to anything and everything.
Okay, maybe we'll take one question now. I saw this woman with the blonde hair. Please, yeah. And then others who have questions, you can save them. We're having another session this evening. It's sort of like an open Q&A.
I am wondering how much of the sutta study and practice teaching that we are getting in the West is already permeated by Abhidhamma teaching without our actually knowing that. And in some of the examples that you gave when you were talking about dealing with anger by analyzing either one's own reaction or the other person through the aggregates, that's kind of how the aggregates have been presented to me as sutta study. So it may not matter to know that, but I am really curious. Are we already kind of walking around with the Abhidhamma just because it has been overlaid and packaged that way?
Well, what I would say is that the kind of teachings that one gets in the suttas on 5 aggregates, those suttas that are expounded in terms of the 5 aggregates, sense bases, elements, dependent origination, already have something of the flavor of Abhidhamma, though they're not yet worked out in its full detail and linked together into this systematic whole of the Abhidhamma. I can't really say for sure how much of the teaching, sutta teaching that you've been hearing is permeated by Abhidhamma. But usually when I give talks or classes, I base my classes entirely on the suttas. But then if I want to bring in something from the commentary, I'll say, this is what the commentary says about this, Or if we take an Abhidhamma standpoint, this is the way the Abhidhamma would treat this. So I tried to keep them distinct. When I was sort of brought up as a monk, trained as a monk in Sri Lanka, I was pretty much told that everything, all these aspects of the teaching fit together into one single unified whole. And so I took Sutta, Abhidhamma, commentaries all in one block. And so I was looking at the suttas very much through the standpoint of the commentaries. But as time went on, I came to see that there were certain points difficult to reconcile between sutta and commentaries and Abhidhamma, or at least I saw that they stem from different historical periods. And so one has to be careful in making distinctions between them. And so now when I teach, I base on the suttas, and if I bring in anything from the commentary, I'll say this is what the commentary says. And even if you look at the notes to my more recent translations, I'll often quote the commentaries, but I say in the preface as a kind of word of warning that we have to beware that the commentaries were written in the 5th century, which is 900 years after the time of the Buddha, and they reflect the views that had accumulated in a particular monastic center in Sri Lanka over the centuries. So one can't read, one has to be cautious of reading the teachings of the commentaries and the Abhidhamma into the early texts. Okay, I think we should now take a nice break. It's a little after 5 o'clock. Yeah.
So we are going to come back in at 7, and there will be a sit between 7 and 7:30, and the monastics will be joining us for that sit, and then there will be an open Q&A about whatever you would like to do, a more casual Q&A, but to certainly include questions from the Abhidhamma that have come up, or there's some points he made in the written material that no one's asked about. Like he uses this line, "This presents us a puzzle." And nobody asks, what does that mean about that puzzle?
What is that?
But you say at one point, "This presents us a puzzle," and no one's asked that question yet. Just to stimulate maybe looking at the literature again. Yeah. So we will be, once they leave, we will all leave, and then I'll see you back in here at 7.
Okay. Usually when we end like a teaching, I do recite verses to share the merits with the Devas, the Bhutas. Those are the deities, the fair spirits, the Dhamma-protecting deities, so that we make them happy, and when they're made happy, then they'll protect the Bodhi Mandala, the site where the Dhamma is being taught. Okay, so now with your minds, you think of it, there are maybe hundreds or thousands of invisible beings around here waiting to receive the merit from our teaching and discussion and listening to the Dhamma. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Etavata cha amhehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe devanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavata cha amhehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhutanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavata cha amhehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe satanumodantu sabba sampatti siddhya bhavagupadaya avichihetato etantare satakayupapanna rupya rupicha